Consent is the foundation of every moral relationship. It is the invisible line that separates respect from violation, morality from abuse. We demand consent for intimacy, for contracts, for medical procedures, for touching another body, even for taking a photograph. It is sacred, one of the most sacred principles we claim to uphold. To act without consent is to deny autonomy, to treat a human being not as an end in themselves, but as a means to satisfy another's desire. And yet, when it comes to the most irreversible act of all, bringing a sentient being into existence, consent disappears entirely. To be born is to be forcibly conscripted into vulnerability, dependence, suffering, death. You are placed into a fragile, decomposing body, without request, bound to a society with unchosen laws, a culture with inherited expectations, an economy with exploitative demands, a one-way track toward aging, decline, and erasure. And still, we are told it is a gift. We must endure it and be thankful. We build vast legal and ethical systems to protect people from harm, exploitation, and coercion. But procreation, the act that guarantees someone will experience pain, loss, fear, and death, is treated as morally untouchable. This is not a minor oversight. It is the blind spot at the center of human morality. Pro-natalist arguments often deflect. You can't ask for consent from someone who doesn't exist. True, and precisely the problem. At first, this sounds reasonable. How could someone who doesn't exist give permission? But this is not a solution. It's an evasion. Because in no other moral domain do we treat the inability to consent as permission to proceed. In fact, the inability to consent is usually taken as a reason to stop, not a green light to act. But not here. Here, procreation is treated as preference, lifestyle, right, regardless of consequences.
We would never perform surgery on an unconscious patient without rigorous ethical review. Yet we are comfortable creating an entire body, a brain that may fracture, a nervous system that may be racked with pain, a heart that will eventually fail, without pausing to ask whether this is an imposition. Children are born blind, with malformed limbs, with chronic illness, with incurable conditions. Every pregnancy rolls the dice. Someone else pays the price. Now consider artificial intelligence. We don't even know if sentient machines will exist, and yet we already debate the ethics of creating them. We ask, should we create something capable of suffering? Are we responsible for the pain of a mind we bring into being? We deliberate before the entity exists. Yet, when it comes to humans, beings guaranteed to suffer, we celebrate their creation without hesitation.
We are told to care about future generations. In climate policy, in economics, in education. Think of the children. But notice something critical. These children do not exist yet. And still, we pass laws. We restructure economies. We restrict industries. We sacrifice present comfort. All for people who are not here. We act on their behalf. We assume responsibility toward them. So don't tell me we don't think ethically about non-existent people. We do, just selectively. Because when it comes to reproduction itself, to creating the very people we claim to care about, suddenly we're told, no one exists yet, so consent doesn't matter. This is a double standard. We imagine the needs of future people when protecting the planet, but ignore their interests when deciding whether to summon them into harm. If non-existence erases moral responsibility, then it should erase it everywhere. But it doesn't, because this argument was never about logic. It was about convenience. Now, imagine a machine. It is sealed, programmed to activate 300 years from now. When it activates, it will randomly blind thousands of people. People who do not yet exist. Would this be ethical? Most people would say no, immediately, without hesitation, because the harm is foreseeable, because the people will exist, because someone will suffer. Now remove the machine. Replace it with reproduction. The outcome is the same. Some future people, who do not yet exist, will for sure suffer, will be born blind, or disabled, or in chronic pain, or into unbearable circumstances. This is not speculative. It is guaranteed. The only difference? In one case, we call it immoral. In the other, we call it love. This is the ethical failure at the core of procreation. Harm is dismissed because it has not happened yet. And when it does, when suffering becomes real, we say, well, they're alive. That's what matters. This leads to the myth of retroactive consent. The idea that if someone eventually enjoys their life, that enjoyment becomes backdated permission. But consent does not work that way. You cannot push someone into the ocean and, if they learn to swim, claim your action was justified. Consent must come before the consequence. Procreation does not allow for that. Once someone exists, there is no neutral position from which to evaluate existence. They are biologically programmed to survive, psychologically conditioned to adapt, socially pressured to be grateful. If they struggle, they are told to cope. If they question life, they are pathologized. Acceptance is framed as approval. But survival is not consent. Adaptation is not agreement. A prisoner singing in a cage does not make the cage moral. And if you question this, if you suggest reconsidering the ethics of reproduction, you are labeled anti-human, anti-hope, mentally unwell. The idea that we should not impose irreversible risk on another without their input is labeled cruel. Restraint is framed as cruelty, caution as nihilism. If moral agency means anything, it means owning the consequences of our choices. So the question remains, on what basis is someone justified in creating a person who cannot consent, cannot refuse, and will bear the full weight of existence? Good intentions are not enough. Love is not a moral exemption. In fact, if life is sacred, then creating it demands greater restraint, not less. When reproduction serves emotional needs, cultural expectations, or existential comfort, it becomes projection, not generosity. Love does not make imposition just. It makes it harder to question. And the child? The future person taught that autonomy is sacred, that consent is essential. They will never receive the one consent that mattered most, the choice to exist. How can we claim to value autonomy while celebrating an act that inherently denies it? Applied consistently, reproduction is indefensible. It is not a gift. It is not a miracle. It is an unconsented experiment on a vulnerable being, with no exit. The system insists on creation, but offers no way to decline. And when someone tries to leave, they are pathologized, silenced. Consent is not yes. Consent is option, real, meaningful option. No one receives that option before birth. Until we face this honestly, without deflection or comfort stories, we will continue to praise what should, at the very least,
make us pause. The act of bringing someone into a life they never asked for.